So, namaskar, all of you, and good evening, warm welcome, and thank you all for making this program a grand success. Season one was enjoyed and participated by many of us, and we are now all set to pay tribute to our nation by discussing and learning the ideologies of contemporary Indian philosophers from the recent past. Today, we are going to start a very crucial season and a very crucial discussion, and it is so important to do and engage with the past 100 years of Indian philosophers and their teachings, their scholarship, so that our generation and the coming generations can get information about the philosophers of our time. And the purpose of this discussion is to highlight the scholarship of recent uh, Indian philosophers. And I make one clarification here that the list I have sent to you is tentative, and we can add more philosophers to the list if time permits. But if some important scholar will be left, please remind me or guide me, so the task in hand surely needs completion. So, with these honest confessions, I would like to invite our honorable speaker and guest and a critical and versatile philosopher, Professor Rakesh Chandra sir, who was Dean of Student Welfare and has been a former head of the Department of Philosophy and Director of Institute of Women Studies, Lucknow University. And we will be listening on the topic, some reflections on Radhakrishnan's Fragments of Confession. So, sir, I'm pleased to welcome you. Please add grace to our cafe. Please start your discussion.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Shipra. It's my honor and privilege to be here to talk on one of the world's greatest Indian recent thinker, Professor Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan. I must thank Professor Balram Singh and Dr. Shipra Dikshit, and I must also thank my very good friend, Dr. Prashant Shukla, for introducing me to these two people from different generations who are so committed to the idea.
Sir, you are muted. Sir, you are muted. Hello, sir. Sir?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sorry.
Yes, can you hear me? Right. So Professor Radhakrishnan, I think, is truly outstanding. And I think one of the very rare philosophers who got great recognition in lifetime. Unlike K.C. Bhattacharya, who in fact became more popular and important after his demise, Radhakrishnan, in fact, is one of the rare people who got outstanding recognition in his own lifetime, including being written about by 23 notable philosophers of the world in the Living Philosopher series, which came in, if I'm not mistaken, 1952. Much before a volume was published on Quine and Strawson, he was the eighth to be recognized as a living philosopher. So let me today start my reading from what I had scribbled, some reflections on Radhakrishnan's, particularly his work, Fragments of a Confession. In 1997, while delivering the William E. Massey Senior Lectures on the History of American Civilization, one of my very favorite and controversial philosophers, Richard Rorty, began with speaking on American national pride with reference to Walt Whitman and John Dewey. National pride is to countries what self-respect is to individuals, a necessary condition for self-improvement. Too much of national pride can produce bellicosity and imperialism, just as excessive self-respect can produce arrogance. But just like too little self-respect makes it difficult for a person to display moral courage, so also insufficient national pride makes energetic and effective debate about national policy unlikely. Emotional involvement with one's country, feeling of intense shame or of glowing pride aroused by various parts of its history and by various present-day national policies is necessary in political deliberation, if political deliberation is to be imaginative and productive. Such deliberations will probably not occur unless pride overweighs shame. And this, I think, is very, very important to me. Another great philosopher, again from the United States of America, Noam Chomsky, in his Russell Lectures 1971, begins with a quote from his proposed Roads to Freedom. Anarchy, Socialism, and Syndicalism, where he wrote, "Those whose lives are fruitful to themselves and to their friends or to the world are inspired by hope and sustained by joy. They see in imagination that things that might be and that the way in which they are to be brought into existence. In their private relationships, they are not preoccupied with anxiety lest they should lose such affection and respect as they receive. They are engaged in giving affection and respect freely, and the reward comes to itself without seeking. In their work, they are not haunted by jealousy or competitors, but are concerned with the actual matter that has to be done. In politics, they do not spend time and passion defending the unjust privilege of their class or nation, but they aim at making the world as a whole a happier, less cruel, and more full of human beings whose growth has not been dwarfed and stunted by oppression." I really like these two quotes. I wish you could all read them. Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, to me, seems one such person who was interpreting the world to change it into a happier, harmonious place with a sense of national pride and self-reflexivity. I shall very sketchily look at his Fragments of a Confession, which forms part of the first section of the Paul Arthur Schlipp volume devoted to his work, which I mentioned earlier. I see Radhakrishnan's questions about Indian identity and its lesson to the world still problematic, and wonder if his recipe for change was ever well received. I know these questions are coming again and again, especially in times of trouble, and especially in the modern times with India's reassertion of its identity. The full title of his essay is "The Religion of the Spirit and World's Need, Fragments of a Confession." And what a beautiful title. It's called "The Religion of the Spirit and World's Need, Fragments of a Confession." Radhakrishnan states that when philosophy became his life's work, he entered a domain which sustained him both intellectually and spiritually all these years. The statement following this is even more interesting. Here he claims that his conception of philosophy was in some ways similar to Marx, who proclaimed in his famous thesis on Feuerbach that philosophy has hitherto been concerned with interpreting life, but time has come for it to change life. Philosophy is committed to a creative task. Although in one sense, philosophy is a lonely pilgrimage of the spirit, in another, it is a function of life. Each word, I think, is so beautiful and so important as you read Radhakrishnan. What is the task ahead? For Marx, it was to understand the dialectic, materialistic, deterministic movement of history, to expedite the march forward towards the steps of society for equal men. For Radhakrishnan, he wondered, may we not prepare for the truth of the world yet unborn soul by a free interchange of ideas and the development of a philosophy which will combine the best of European humanism and Asiatic religion, a philosophy profounder and more living than either, endowed with greater spiritual and ethical force, which will conquer hearts of men and compel people to acknowledge its way. What a beautiful, hopeful idea coming from a man who wrote The Atlas of Life. To me, as to many others, Radhakrishnan's engagement with his is deeply intriguing, and his sense of hope sometimes feels distressing. One may wonder the message of India's religion or philosophy stands no better chance than the early proselytizing Christian Salvation Army, because at one time the Christian Salvation Army thought that they are saving the souls of all people, and that was called the white man's burden. Now, would India's message, India's religion, India's hope for getting everybody to understand it meet the same fate? And why does Radhakrishnan have more hope than for his own religion than any other? He's well aware of and the critical elements of which he claims are part of dogmatic religion. He is also well aware of logical positivists, the critique of religions and metaphysical statements as meaningless. But he's critical of this, though very summarily, and instead of using good philosophical criticism, calls for his evidence a scientist like Albert Einstein, who said that the empirical philosophy will not last long. He could, of course, perhaps have used other well-known arguments about the theory of meaninglessness of statements already presupposed a certain kind of metaphysics, and he might have given many others, but that he doesn't choose. The longevity argument also that he gives is also strange, and Radhakrishnan response to the actions of his time is also a little troubling. Radhakrishnan is forthright to declare that militant atheism is an answer to dishonest religion. So he does understand that why are there so many strong and almost militant voices of atheism. And he says very clearly, as I mentioned, that this is an answer to dishonest religion, and that religion cannot claim to be the great civilizing agency of the world. He's aware of Marx's critique about the pernicious nature of religion. But strangely, Radhakrishnan sees hope for the possibility of a new religion, which is universally valid with an awakened social passion. One may wonder again, as I said, what gives him this sense of hope? What are his arguments? In the new global order, what is the viability? And I also wonder and worry that in this present world where we have seen terrible things happening because of religion, and even now there are conflicts happening in many parts of the world closer home, where people are fighting for their identity and homeland on the basis of religion. What gives Radhakrishnan the hope? Radhakrishnan gives account of Bergson, Samuel Alexander, Whitehead, and Aquinas. I'm sure these are old-fashioned philosophers. Many of the young people might not have read them. But all these are neither given an exegesis nor an argued response in his writing. Suddenly, then, are his declarations. This world we have seen is not a machine. It is an act of worship. It is in love with God, as Aristotle said, and is working towards him, its possibility, the eternal idea which it is accomplishing, is conceived by the Greeks as an abstract principle, the timeless logos. Following this are his accounts of the unconditioned being in Hindu thought. Radhakrishnan does not give any appraisal whether these are coherent ideas, well-argued postulates, or acceptable existence for the belief system to govern our present lives. However, he goes on to speak more about unfolding of God and its sustained presence. He then suddenly speaks of Kant's antinomy, and strangely, to my mind, and this is in fact something which I really want to point out, that he strangely misunderstands Kant, and or at least this is the point. The point of the dialectic, or the logic of illusion, as you would all remember, who are students of Kant, that in the Critique of Pure Reason there are three sections. The first is the transcendental aesthetic, the second is the transcendental analytic, and the third is the transcendental dialectic. The point of the entire dialectic, or the logic of illusion as he calls it, was to show the consequences of transgressing the limits of actual and possible experience. When we do so, we end up in contradictions, the paralogisms, the antinomies. The moral is not to transgress, but Radhakrishnan seems to be taking that. Radhakrishnan strangely concludes that when the end of cosmic history is reached, we have passed beyond the limits of history, we have transcended it, and it is not a question of ending time, but the end of time. This is an interesting kind of a take that Radhakrishnan takes, but I think it's a misread of Kant. However, even without Kant, Radhakrishnan could have maintained the position that he wants to take, that actually this is the idea of the Hindu life and Hindu idea that he wants to take. Radhakrishnan rightly points out that the distinction between existentials and the ancient Indian thinkers as they choose between despair and hope. This is again a very popular kind of a reading, and that, you know, there's a great deal of similarity between the existential Indian philosophy, the idea of intimacy, the idea of subjectivity, are very often compared together. But Radhakrishnan very clearly, and I think to my mind very clearly, enunciates that actually, in terms of choosing, Indians choose hope, while the existential thinkers largely, and I think they're, if you look at Camus and others, then they choose despair. He also points out towards the limitation of science in case of human relationships. He enjoins that it is our duty to achieve a social revolution and remove the social wrongs of hunger, cold, illiteracy, sickness, and unemployment. How relevant. But there are more evils which are organic to the spiritual condition of man, which need to be addressed. He emphasizes a sense of beyond, which gives us a soaring power. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan remarks that the ontological argument may not prove the existence of God, but it does prove that human predicament, it shows the human predicament and its need for an absolute. This again is very fascinating. Here again, Radhakrishnan does not attend to Kant carefully. The tendency to seek absolute is recognized by Kant, but criticized as illegitimate. Its existence alone cannot justify it, but Radhakrishnan provides no argument here, at least in this. Radhakrishnan says Kant is right in denying that being is a predicate, but soon after he declares we are immersed in being. And this I find again very curious, that what does this immersion in being mean? But Radhakrishnan is telling us that yes, though being is not a predicate and Kant is right, but we are immersed in being. So what is the meaning of being here? Radhakrishnan says that we are immersed in being. This is not Kant's view as implied by his critique, as we all know. It must be emphasized that man's seeking infinite is for Radhakrishnan not a failing as it is for Kant. Radhakrishnan most critically misunderstood the major representative of modernity and reason, according to me. Religion is approvingly characterized by Radhakrishnan, and this is, I think, very important for us to attend. And she thinks that religion is a turning inwards. And this, I think, is an extremely important thing for us to notice when we look at Radhakrishnan on religion. Because now when we look at religion is largely seen as a part of the public policy and the public world. And we see the horrors of it as well as the limits of it. But for Radhakrishnan, he thinks that religion is a turning inwards, deepening in our awareness and developing a more meaningful attitude towards life. And charmingly, he also quotes St. Paul that religion is the treasure in an earthen vessel. Radhakrishnan speaks of the unity of religion in terms of its essentials without dogma. He thinks of different people of the world who are all seeking man's union with himself, nature, and fellow men. He thinks in future there will be an integration of all religions. Prophetic, poetic, charming, though they are, but there seems to be no argument for hopes of such a religion which are available to us or to Radhakrishnan. However, he does seem to be a man of great hope and respect. In education too, Radhakrishnan sought to encourage study of comparative religion to demonstrate essential unity. This, to my mind, has been perhaps the most unexamined area of inquiry, and attending which requires some critical skill and certain critical acumen. In a disenchanted world, is there some reason to believe in the hopes of this learned statesman? I call attention to a few questions. Number one, are metaphysical beliefs of each religion central? Or many people say, no, they are not. Are metaphysical beliefs integrally related to the moral injunctions, rites, and rituals? Three, is the fact of some material or spiritual origin the ground for valuing each one as the same? Number four, how well grounded is the theory that man cannot live without religion? I believe that metaphysical truths are central to religions and are integrally related to the moral injunctions of each faith. Not only that, I think that most of the rituals, which are generally considered to be peripheral, are also very deeply related to the ideas that there are in their metaphysics. Say, for instance, when in the Hindu form you are performing a sacrifice or a yajna, you keep on saying idam namama, then you are actually referring to a certain kind of a metaphysical belief about giving up of ownership and also the self-same consciousness if there exists. So I believe that religions are incompatible at a deeper level, not just peripheral. There are many people, including the very famous Bhagwan Das from Banaras, who wrote about unity of religions. And there are so many who talk about the comparative sameness of religion, including Swami Vivekananda. But I really think that we need to look at that there are certain deep incompatibilities, not just at the peripherals in religions. For instance, Islam's denial of shirk or participation. It says that nobody can participate in the person of the Lord, and the person of Lord cannot be said to be part of the individual self. In the Upanishadic Hindu idea, the aspiration of identity is actually of the self-same consciousness. There are deep theoretical contexts, and these are deep theoretical contests. While there may be huge instances of accommodation and liberal experiences, there might be commonalities in ethics, there might be commonalities in epistemology, but there are, in many cases, very deep-seated differences in metaphysics. That all things are made of atoms or our spirits does not immediately imply the sameness of moral treatment. The metaphysical truths just not entail a moral injunction simply. We need a theory that if that be the metaphysical status, then what do we need to do? Radhakrishnan's idea that man of future too must have a religion of spirit is an article of faith. And is it borne out by evidence? That we have to see. Many people who, including B.R. Ambedkar, also could not resist the temptation of religion. And though he did not go to traditional religion, he created a Navayan. So the idea of religions or man's essential need for belongingness and religion being providing that succor is something that needs more critical scrutiny. Do we reject Radhakrishnan's hope and dreams, or do we interrogate him and try to understand him better? I just want to close with a remembrance of another great educator here, Paulo Freire, who spoke of love and liberation of the people through conscientization, praxis, dialogue, and history. We all know that in recent times, he was one of the greatest educators. He spoke about pedagogy of hope. He talked about pedagogy of the oppressed, where both the oppressor and the oppressed can retrieve their humanity in their engagement. He contests the idea of education, which is binding, as against the idea of education that liberates. He speaks of the human vocation to retrieve our freedom, our right to name our word in the world. He speaks that the oppressor and the oppressed both have lost their humanity, and the culture of negotiation both can recover their lost humanity. He does not speak of dictatorship of the proletariat. Perhaps, like many other students of philosophy of my generation, our exposure to Radhakrishnan primarily consisted in reading his 2 volumes on Indian philosophy, with considerable sneering from some of our teachers bearing allegiance to analytic mode of philosophizing. We were told he was a Hindu, a religious-minded person who was an Oxford but hardly recognized by our philosophical contemporaries. But his apologetic tone, I also found it very strange, because in his idealist view of life, he starts, there was also philosophy towards the east of Suez. But he was actually, I think, though it seems irritating now, he was actually at that time trying to respond to his teachers in Calcutta University and many other places who had a very derogatory view about the Hindu philosophers. And he was trying to explain to the West in their own language, through giving examples from the Bible and many Western philosophers, what was useful in the traditional Indian philosophy. I think it's important for us to remember that when these 2 volumes came, perhaps there was no book in English. It's 1923, perhaps, there when he publishes these works. Before that, there was perhaps no compendium which contained a glimpse of all the philosophers or many Indian philosophical schools. Despite the fact that nearly, I think 60 researches have been done on his work in the departments of philosophy all over the country, he's still not taught as a contemporary Indian philosopher in the systems. Many scholars also continue to be wary about his strong inclination to prove that Hindu absorption in the absolute is better suited for the universal religion than, for instance, Christianity. So as I close and talk about my readings of Radhakrishnan, they are scattered and rewarding, and I read his translation of the Bhagavad Gita, which he dedicated to Mahatma Gandhi. I read his 2 essays on Mahatma Gandhi, on religion and the politics of Mahatma Gandhi, his message to mankind. But what truly was most engaging was the essay that I chose to speak about, The Fragments of a Confession. And as I was just mentioning, his comparison to Freire, he does not speak of retribution or guillotine, but a chance for recovery in love and reciprocity. He has hope in freedom and democracy. And this is somewhat unlike Marx, perhaps because he's a Christian church father. Does Radhakrishnan's hope, so clearly articulated in his appraisal of the Socratic state's 2 functions of policing and welfare, and his championing of the pluralist democracy, in some way open to a possibility of looking at him through a Freirean lens? I hope after 150 years almost of this great teacher, We dare to ask many new questions of him and try to seek answers to build a loving world of mutual trust and belief. I also wish to share that while I'm doubtful of Radhakrishnan's monistic spiritual answer to the world's maladies of conflict, I'm equally skeptical of relativism in morality or epistemology. An incommensurable set of pluralities, forms of life, language games are attractive hypotheses meant to challenge homogenizing hegemonies. But I find them hugely problematic. A minimal common morality, like a minimal sense of reason of modernity, requires a serious reconstruction. And in that, I think Radhakrishnan does have an extremely important place. We all need to read him with great seriousness, also look at the times in which he was writing, also recognize that in his own time, perhaps he was the only Indian philosopher who was recognized prior to independence in the world. And as I mentioned, that a full volume on Living Philosopher series, much before there was one on Quine and Strawson, or Air, was published in 1952 on Radhakrishnan. So with these rather scattered remarks on Radhakrishnan, I close my talk. And now, if there are certain additions to be made by scholars, I'd be very happy.
Thank you so much, sir. And I must say that Radhakrishnan has the rare qualification of being well versed in both the traditions, what I know about him. And his tradition to synthesize East and West is remarkable. And today's topic was so new to me, and I hope there were so many questions and discussions point. Meera ma'am, yeah, please. Ma'am, you are muted.
No?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am. Now
Oh,
audible. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Rakesh ji. I said namaste. You did not say namaste. Fine, doesn't matter. So
I actually was not being able to respond. Yes, yes.
I said namaskara. So all right, from South India, namaskar. Okay. It's interesting to have the fragments of confession, but what I would like to also reflect on is that all these that you have mentioned, he has expressed in his preface to Indian philosophy and also in the appendices later on. So it's, and he has already, what he said, he has already confessed even earlier. So this is a smaller, naturally a space where he wanted to, I think, reiterate so that would do. Secondly, Rakesh ji, Marxism, when you try to put a parallel with Radhakrishnan, I mean, we will ask as to which Marx, because you have feminist Marxists, you have French, interpretation of Marxism, where Marx and Sartre had engaged themselves on these issues, some of the issues that we. Then you have the African studies on. I mean, there are very many kinds of studies on which. So, which critical theories would you like to associate with this thing? Because Marx, just to say Marx's critique of religion, we I think keep or would not understand it very well, because that becomes very general statement. Prior to that, you also perhaps noticed, and you know as a scholar, that Marx himself was a Hegelian idealist. So, the dialectic materialism, which follows later on, we can say that, yes, philosophers also change their views, interpretations. Now, I would like to you to highlight, or rather throw light on as to what is the distinct perspective that you feel that Radhakrishnan has tried to give, because he has many writings and his interpretations, translations are so many and so rich. So what you find as distinct one, which you do not find in any other this thing, which he has tried to, like, for example, if I quote him, the special nomenclature of Indian philosophy, which cannot be easily rendered into English accounts for the apparent strangeness of the intellectual landscape. So if the outer difficulties are overcome, we feel the kindred throb of human heart. And this is important, which because human is neither Indian nor European. So I mean, he has a very I would say the counter. If you take the counter discourse of ideologies, you will find him that the interpretative plurality is a kind of formulation which has even impressed, or rather have affected the modern lawmaking, like people like Upendra Bakshi, was very well known globally, talking about on the idea of the human rights. So I have different points, but I don't want to take any more time. So if you just kindly also try to see this, and I find because I have this approach.
Let me first try and put my own position.
Yeah.
One that I think, this has to be very clear that I have been working on analytical philosophy and feminist theme for the past 30 years. And my familiarity with most of literature and Marxist literature is fairly large. And also my activism, both in India and abroad, has been fairly large. So I'm fairly familiar to a lot of things, both in theory and practice. One, as I would like to say, and that's a difficulty when you are actually not face to face. One is that I mentioned from the text itself that how Radhakrishnan thinks that he's like Marx, which I thought was very curious. And where he does mention, I don't know why you did not notice, history dies on Feuerbach. And particularly that famous quote that, now is the time to change the world. That's the kind of Marx that he's talking. So all that African Marx, etc., does not have any position in the kind of discussion that I'm taking. So that's the Marx that he's talking about in terms of the need for change. And that's the kind of thing that he thinks that he is Marx in that of getting philosophy to function as an agent of change, not just an explanation of reality as it was in the highest view of life. That's one position, very clear and loud. Secondly, the question that, since Marx did his research on idealism, so there you can draw in some kind of an idealism from him, like Radhakrishnan, is not borne out at all. The critique of religion that you find in Marx, especially I think in recent scholarship, is to be understood largely as not a critique of religion, but a criticism of the criticisms of religion. Because most of the religious religion had been fairly criticized by people like Herder and Schlegel much before Marx. What he was actually criticizing was those kinds of criticism. And he was giving a new kind of criticism of religion, which was addressed by Marx. Just as you find that in Marx, you do not find a very critical kind of criticism of the idea of justice, because he's saying that the idea of justice can be numerously interpreted. So he doesn't want to enter into that debate, and he headlong comes to a certain kind of a theory, which he does. It's very curious that you find that there are very few arguments that you find even in Marx for the kind of theoretical framework that he builds up. When it comes to interpreting Marx from the feminist perspective, it's very well known that there is a school of feminism which does reject the kind of Marxian overall framework which overstates the idea of class over the other more subtle categories of gender. while there is another which actually utilizes very well this perspective of Marx for feminist purposes, and wherein they think that actually the reduction of women from being producers to reproducers in the industrial society is critically wrong. Radhakrishnan, however, does not address these questions at all. And he headlong goes on into another kind of understanding of religion, a religion which I think, again, we have to see that how Radhakrishnan is so impressed with Tagore, with Gandhi, and so his idea is again full of hope and interpretation. He doesn't take the Russell Copleston debate. He doesn't, as I mentioned, rather a little politely but critically, that his reading of Kant is not, according to me, a right reading, because he misunderstands Kant very blatantly. So that's a kind of thing. And I think that, we need to, when we are looking at a great philosopher, one of the ways is actually to give him the due respect by critically examining that philosopher rather than just praising the person and saying that he was great. So to my mind, Radhakrishnan is a man of outstanding genius, and he was trying to also interpret to the Western audience and the powerful people in India, because most of the university system in India in which he studied was, he was taught by philosophy, even Indian philosophy, by foreigners, and who had very derogatory views about Hindu ideas.
These are okay. There is no doubt about that. These are okay. I didn't ask that. I said, what is the distinctive perspective? Because a religion is a very controversial term, and religion is seen differently. I mean, religion will not go to the term religion, but because I do have differences of opinion. But I'm saying, what is Dr. Radhakrishnan's distinct perspective that you find? Without, I mean, we need not go to a Marxist perspective. His own perspective is reflected very well.
No,
what is that?
No, I really don't know what you're asking, so I can't respond.
I'm asking because there is a trend of tradition of inquiry, which is also in the Greek tradition of the interlocutor, like Socrates tried to ask questions. So this asking questions is a part of the Indian heritage, and Amartya Sen's argumentative Indian is totally based on this concept, which he has naturally kind of extends this inquiry, the tradition to ask questions. Why to ask question? Because he goes for a liberal humanistic perspective. That he also even, which of course, next to that, transculturation, which needs a lot of discussion. I do not want to get, but I was saying that when you mentioned that he didn't, or about the existence, the intensity of existence is being so much brought to light and brought to this being, for example. The being or existence has been. So these are the two distinct, which is very different from the global perspective. That is what
you did not listen carefully. This is precisely what I said, that he, on the one hand, said that Kant thinks that being, using being as a predicate is wrong, and immediately he starts saying that everything is sublimated into the idea of being. Wherein I think from the philosophical perspective of philosophy of language, especially the analytic tradition, which was rich in his own time, would not be considered to be meaningful at all. And so his talk about being, and it seems rather problematic, because when he talks about being and the absolute, he would have to actually answer and respond to the questions which are raised in his own times, particularly, and even in our time, that what does it mean?
Maybe we will talk, Professor Chandra, maybe we will talk later on, because some people are also here as thing, because I
would be upfront and say I've been teaching philosophy of religion for 35 years, and therefore I know that how people in philosophy of religion have been responding to it. No.
I'm not.
So
contesting.
Yeah. So this question,
maybe RP sir can help us. RP sir, Please join the discussion, sir. Yeah.
I just try to bridge the little gap which is there between Professor Rakesh Chandra and Professor Neera. They are equally very argumentative, very consistent, very analytical, very clear also. So, but now, you know, I'm actually at Amritsar these days, a place, Guru Nanak Dev University. I have joined here as a dean. That also Faculty of Humanities and Religious Studies. So I didn't know that you are going to give such a comprehensive talk on religion. Otherwise, I would have talked to my colleagues. They would have joined. They love to join it. Yeah. So Sipra, I would like to request that you should give a briefing also before the speakers come here, because Sikhism is a religion which is typically a religion of sacrifices, martyrs, and the whole land is like that only. But anyway, I'll come to that later on. First thing is that congratulations to Dr. Shipra and the team, Professor Balramji, and that the beginning has really started with Professor Rakesh Chandra, and very fascinating theme here taken up of the 100 years of philosophy, and the first 3 decades were very remarkable. Many people were trying to make reflections on religion, Vivekananda, Tagore, Gandhi, and even Sri Aurobindo, the Radhakrishnan, philosophers, and everybody. Religion, one may agree or disagree with it, but you cannot ignore it because it's so embedded in the society. Marxists, they tried to ignore it, but then they realized that it cannot be ignored. So one has to come to terms of it. So let me just, it's not any kind of a question, but some kind of an observation that I have. That if we look at Marxist position on religion, then, and if I raise the question that does Marx really have a theory of religion? Apparently, it seems that the opium narrative is not a theory. So it's simply a kind of a remark, he has it. But if we go into the deeper aspect of it, then we find that there is a theory of religion in Marxism. That it is the, it narrates the condition of the deprived people, oppressed people. And that also religion is a part of the superstructure, not the base. So just like other legal, moral, and political, economic, and other issues which are there in the superstructure, religion is also a kind of, placed in the superstructure. And Marx was critical of the whole of the capitalist superstructure as such, kind of a thing. And the religion, in fact, when science and technology started developing, Marx thought that it will defeat religion. But the actual practice was something entirely different. Number of Christians kept rising globally. And, it's a very complex kind of a phenomenon. So what was so distinctive about Radhakrishnan and what is so distinctive about Karl Marx is first that where did they locate religion? Marx located in the superstructure, and he located as a way of life, kind of a thing. And then the whole narrative gets a different turn altogether. And it's a matter of debate. People have been debating, and there is no end to it. I don't know if I'm connected, Shifra, or I'm away.
Yeah, yes, sir. You are audible, sir.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, great. Because nobody else is visible, so I thought I'm just talking in the darkness. Maybe some. So it's good that you came like a flash, divine being. So it's very. In fact, what Professor Rakesh Chandra had taken up is a very broad spectrum of religion, and critical issues are there, comparative issues are there, and he may not be giving a completely new theory of religion, but he is definitely a new philosopher, because the kind of vocabulary he has placed before us, from so many philosophers, Chomsky and others, so we are no longer in the same way. You can see how many categories are there. And religion, if you translate it as a dharma kind of a thing, sampradaya kind of a thing, you find a different, dimension emerges of the religion. Religion as a way of life, that becomes a kind of social, different kind of phenomenon. And Radhakrishnan was well aware of Indian tradition. He is known as the Indian Hegel, just as Marx was, Western Hegel kind of a thing. So Hegelianism is there, absolute idealism is there. The notion of absolute is something which can be, subject matter of the critique. Mythologies and rituals can be taken away to a different direction. But on the absolute also, there are so many contending positions. So that is the, kind of a thing. So as a philosophers, we can make a critical reflection on very many positions. And sometimes it happens that philosophers really do not become so distinct from others, because there is various meeting points between them. Even Hegel and Marx and Radhakrishnan, there may be a merging point because they were all top-class intellectuals. So in their ideas. So they are, even if they are distinct, please do not separate them. They are all evolving in the ethos, and that is the intellectual ethos. And these days, actually, after coming to this place in Amritsar, I find that religion as a dharma is nothing but a kind of, sacrifice. How much you give it to others, and that also become immortal that way. And, and also assimilation, assimilating various ideas, not making distinct, separate, categorizing them as some kind of catalog. But assimilation is something which is very important component of it. So these are some of the, observations that I have. And and it's so nice to be with you, Professor Rakesh Chandra. Keep it up. And I enjoyed your lecture thoroughly.
Thank you so much, sir. I'm delighted. Firstly, congratulations. Congratulations. And I hope we get an invitation soon to visit you at Amritsar.
Yes, sure.
I've never been to Amritsar.
Yeah. So we are likely to going to have a seminar on it. So very soon.
I'd love to come and visit you.
There in the list also.
Right. One of the things that I think I just wanted to just remind, again, because we are not face-to-face, is that I did mention that Radhakrishnan think about religion as turning inwards. And as Professor R.P. Singh very rightly said, that when Marx is talking about religion in terms of an ideology or false consciousness, then he's talking about a suprastructure, which is actually an external thing which is governing not only individual lives, but all superstructures. But Radhakrishnan is very clearly saying that it is a turning inwards, deepening of our awareness, developing of meaningful attitude towards life. And so that's the kind of thing that he's talking about. And he's again talking about the unity of all religions.
Even in poetry also, Professor Rakesh Chandra, in poetry also, during the first world, just after the Second World War, 1940s onwards, people thought that if Marx has talked about crisis in the outer world, there is a deeper crisis inside the mind.
Absolutely.
And that became the, kind of, the place for existentialist thinking also. So most of the philosophers,
but Radhakrishnan at the time when he's in Oxford, and where there are these heavy debates going on, the Copleston debate, Russell Copleston debate, and all of that, he does not, in any of his works, actually directly participate in that. And he then takes to the more generic kind of an idea. He's very well aware, as I mentioned, of the criticisms. He's also very well aware of the militant atheism as a response to dishonest religion. But when it comes to arguing for the postulates, he doesn't do that. And that, I think, because his primary purpose, I think, at that time was to actually postulate a certain kind of a position in response primarily to his teachers and to the West.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I think Alok Tandon is waiting for it. Thank you.
May I?
Yeah. Alok sir, please.
Oh, thank you very much. And congratulations for starting a new series.
Thank
and
you.
also inviting Professor Rakesh Chandra. And I must congratulate him also, because I truly enjoyed his talk today. Because a person who is coming from the background of analytical philosophy and feminist philosophy, how he looks at uh, Radhakrishnan, who is mainly, in my view, a sort of religious thinker. Anyway, I would like to point out that the question of distinctness about Radhakrishnan is what you have been saying repeatedly, that he gave a response, and you must say the fitting response, to his teachers as well as to the colonial West, to project, to bring about what was there in Indian philosophical past. So this is some sort of what you said in the beginning, pride and shame. So in a way, that sort of inferiority complex which was being developed and which was being injected into Indian mind, he protested against that, and he protested against it brilliantly with his many writings. Now, the question is, there may be many. You accepted that his understanding of Kant is faulty. I must add that many commentators have also pointed out that Radhakrishnan's understanding of Buddhism is also faulty. He is trying to reduce Buddhism to Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta. So you must look into that also, respond to it if possible. But for the understanding of Radhakrishnan and philosophical understanding of Radhakrishnan, I must say his book, The Idealist View of Life, is more important than his books on religion, etc. And in that, he has tried to develop his philosophical understanding truly. And I read some part of it long back in my graduate days when I was a science student, and I threw it away because he gave more importance to intuition than to the scientific reasoning. So that part is also very important when you look into religion. Now, the question about comparative religion you have taken very well, and I must support you that at a deeper level there are so many differences among religions that to talk about some sort of unity or some sort of universal religion coming out of those is not possible. And also that the hope towards future through that type of religion is also very, very problematic. But the question about Marx and religion has been raised, and I think Shipra must have some other occasion to so that we may talk about, because this issue is very important today. I just saw that Indian saints and sadhus lining up, just seen in the 15 minutes back in Facebook, to get into the marriage pandal of Ambani's son. So this way, our religious leaders are performing, and what message they give, what sort of universal religion or what sort of dharma, the concept of dharma, that they project. And I think that universal kind of dharma is no longer there. And we must accept this reality. In that context, now it becomes that we must look very, very carefully, not only in the philosophy of religion, and I must say that you must respond, Professor Chandra, into the sociology of religion. And when we look in religion towards religion as the sociology of religion point of view, then we find how religion is used not only by the capitalist class as a superstructure, but today's politics also as a marker of identity and community to glorify the past and to fight against the other. So this sort of understanding of religion is needed. And I think this old understanding of religion, which comes from our tradition, I think the Vivekananda was there, universal religion, and this Radhakrishnan is there. But that is not that will not serve the purpose. So I think Marx was, in a sense, he was not giving a particular theory about religion, but he was talking about the role religion plays in the economic, social, political as well as in the personal life of deprived people. And that is very important, just as we look into the latest tragedy of 121 persons in what happened in Hathras or somewhere, Mathura, where people were so superstitious, running after a Baba, Guru Baba. So the state, the real state of religion has to be understood. But that is not the issue with Dr. Radhakrishnan, but how he will, his own understanding of universal religion will carry us to the new future. I think this is very, very problematic. But I must congratulate you that you have taken a very good critical view. And once somebody asked me what was the real contribution of Dr. Radhakrishnan, I said his contribution to create a Indian Institute of Advanced Studies in Shimla in place of Viceroy's laws is the lasting contribution, where so many of Indian scholars have researched and given so much of good scholarship to us. So I think that idea of religion is to be taken separately somewhere, and in that Dr. Radhakrishnan should also be taken up. His understanding should also be discussed. But today's world is very, very problematic about the role of religion, and I think Professor Chandra will accept that this sort of religion is not going to help. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. But 1 second before proceeding towards answers, I request Balram sir to please give his feedbacks on the new series. So please.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think it's such a pleasure to have CIPRA start this. This is something that maybe my life is very ignorant. And that's why I try to find out answers and approach people like Professor Rakesh Chandra has been very helpful to me, because we have interacted in several events, and I met him, and he's very, very thorough in what he says. He's very strong in what he says. So that is about this series, but I think the today's seminar, but the series itself is a huge undertaking, and we have his blessings, as well as Professor R.P. Singh and others who are really, this is a mission. This is not just a discussion. It looks like we need to have a longer period. Maybe you should have 3-hour event every time you do, rather than doing just one lecture. I think you should have, from what I'm hearing, Professor Meera Chakravarti and Professor Alok Tandon, and everybody has a strong and expanded view, which is very important to have for this purpose that we are doing. But the purpose here is to initiate an idea that what is the philosophical contribution, original philosophical contribution of Indian scholars, particularly the ones who have been in academia. Because I just noticed that when I go to philosophy conferences, sometimes I'm very lucky that people invite me there. I just hear about them talking about Travis, or whatever, some names I don't even know, John Dewey, Karl Popper, Chomsky, now I heard today. All this, even today we couldn't escape that. We couldn't escape that, Radhakrishnan, and not being talked about as to what he is, but rather what he was dealing with, and who are other people as the references. So the only feedback I have for that is that we request our scholars who come here, so to first elaborate on whatever that philosophy, without really necessarily comparing. I know that, in philosophy tradition, it's very almost impossible not to do that, because you always are comparing. But I see Radhakrishnan, in a much better intellectually than what I am. My situation, why I'm interacting, why I'm even saying all this, because I see misunderstanding in the outside world, but I'm seeing it personally, and I see in practice. That's not in just theory and writing. But I also see this in writing from or in speaking from Indian scholars. Radhakrishnan must have faced this. It's just like, several initiatives I have taken personally. It's just because I see this is not right. But I doesn't mean that I know what is right. I just know this is not right. So I try to do something, react here, we started even Center for Indic Studies, because there was nothing like that. Everybody else tells about India, and we have nothing else to say from our point of view. So, but that doesn't mean that I know everything. I really don't. Maybe Radhakrishnan didn't know, or maybe what he knew, he really not exactly what came out, because he was dealing with a different kind of audience. He was in the University of Oxford. He was dealing with, if he didn't open every time his mouth just because somebody said so, it's just because there were other constraints we have to follow. So, but if we can find what he was really, it looks like he was several. He was talking about religion. He was talking about Advaita. I don't know that much about it. And then he was influenced by so many people, so including Swami Vivekananda and others. So he was using this ammunition to deal with the fire that was going on there. And in the process, it seems like he did have his strength. What is that? What was that his strength that he used? I mean, my strength may be ignorance. I just readily accept that, and I don't know. So if I don't know, then I can say whatever I want to say because I don't know. And that maybe allows me to, that becomes my strength of escaping when somebody says, no, you can't say something. I say, I don't know. But I also go to Professor Chandra or Prashant Sukla or somebody, say, what about this? So they will tell me, because I don't know. I'm not pretending that I know, but I know this, that I don't know. So maybe Radhakrishnan obviously has to be stronger than just simply, communicator of idea from India to the West, or responding to the West. He did have something deeper in him, which is what I think we need to use these examples to bring that depth, so that we say Radhakrishnan's philosophy. Now, one last point before I finish my comments here is that when in India, we don't call philosophy, we call darshan. And I know there was some discussion about science. I think it was Professor Alok Tandon said something about science versus intuition. We were discussing today about Bhagavad Gita. It says about Chanik. Intuition is Chanik. There is a Professor Alok Tandon, it seems like he also has science background. There is the intuition in the right brain. That doesn't mean that it doesn't go through the process of science. It just happens so quickly that we think it's intuition. It's like suddenly appears. It's not, nothing appears without going through that. If we know the true science, many times we don't know. I mean, in my own research, we do things that happen at 10 to the power minus 15 seconds. So that like that. This is not intuition though. We just have to get the tool to get there. So intuition also has a science. This is what I'm trying to say. Some people, I mean, we know Professor Meera Chakravarti, who talks about women and feminism. Women have this ability, intuitive ability, but that doesn't mean it's not a science. It is a science. It works. They're right brain people. Right brain works more like a parallel processing versus the serial processing. So I think maybe science is limited, but darshan is the idea of India. So those who do talk about philosophy, they have seen it. This is what I mean. They have seen it means they have practiced it. They have lived it. And that part of Radhakrishnan should also come out. This is what I would suggest. And if we are in a series of 100 years, hopefully we get so many of us, our colleagues who are identified as having philosophy, because my particular mission and ICPR has been kindly helpful in this, is to identify Indian philosophers as the whole sequel, and then we bring them to United States, at least. I mean, I know Radhakrishnan not here, but those who we find his philosophy, we need to write a book on his philosophy, and the circumstances, okay. And then we bring a dozen or so Indian philosophers, expose it to Chomsky. Chomsky has tried to do this linguistics and Sanskrit. He has tried himself he's a philosopher, but he was trying to fix it. He tried to do this to English, but he finds that English does not sustain that kind of grammatical continuation that Panini's does. So he himself has admitted, but he has tried to do it. So I think people like him need to be confronted, not like, whatever they say, but that we have the Indian philosophers also, and they have a very different kind of view. I think darshan is one parameter we should look at. So if we do not have anything to say of our own, maybe that is not as good a philosophy, even though maybe you can argue as much as you want to, and I think the argument is part of the life. But I think we should, when we want to, darshan should be one of the parameters, one of the modulators of what we want to talk about. So thank you very much, Sipra, for starting this. Thank you very much, Professor
Thank you,
Rakesh
sir.
Chandra.
This idea was absolutely yours, and sir has a vast vision, and we should accomplish this mission as we can do. So
we'll do everything possible in my next 50 years of life.
Yes.
I've told people I will be living for 114 years, 8 months and 23 days. So I have plenty of time to take care of this.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So,
thank you,
ma'am.
Dr. Balram Singh. Yeah. No, wonderful. What you suggested is wonderful, Professor Balram Singh, because this is what we are trying to see, because that is why the intellectual landscape is so different, and therefore the darshana and intuition that you brought out, I think, have to be examined, and it has been examined, and that is what I was trying to reflect on. And just tell me, any of the scholars present here, tell me the definition of dharma or religion. Tell me that, because the English term religion has created a very, very lot of confusion. We don't have in any of these sources the meaning of dharma as religion. No, dharma is religion. Who translated it? Why did it? Why scholars also fell for it? I have no idea. Because dharma is not religion in that sense. And therefore, you rightly brought out that if you go to the sources and if you see it from the perspective of the intuition, the darshana, the rishi, the darshana, it totally changes the landscape, which I totally agree with you. So, thank you, Shipra, and thank you, Professor Singh, and everybody.
Yeah,
so I think we need to. Yeah.
Sir wants to respond.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Very quickly, I think we all thank Professor Balram Singh for his wonderful ideas and his indomitable spirit to bring people together and to think in multiple ways. One of the things that I think, two very small things that I'd like to respond. One, I think that in terms of Radhakrishnan's contribution, he was trying in his own way to bring, I think, as Alok Tandonji pointed out, the idealist view of life gives an original interpretation where he gives a certain kind of an argument for Maya Avidya, which is Shankarite, but it also responds to the Ramanuja challenge and gives a different kind of an interpretation. The other is his deep sense of universal religion, which he thought would be, and again, on that I must say, as I responded earlier, that his idea of religion is turning inwards. So that's, I think, very interesting. The other thing which I think needs to be looked at, कि वो हिंदी में नहीं है और अंग्रेजी में नहीं है, the idea is that, like, say, for instance, intuition also has a technical meaning. In some philosophers, intuition means direct, unmediated knowledge. Sakshatkaritvam, as it were to say, that it is unmediated by anything. That would be intuitive knowledge. In certain other cases, it would be that apart from the senses, there is a special category, like the case of certain philosophers where they have intuition as a spirit category. So intuitionism in ethics, intuitionism in epistemology are differently used by different people. And so I think it would be a good idea to look at that. Similarly, when you look at terms like dharma, so you know that there are 6 different senses in which dharma is used in Sanskrit. Dharma, when you say Agni ka dharma hai dahakta, then that's one thing. Then when you talk about Swadharma, then it is something else. Then when you talk about, so there are at least 6 different meanings of the term dharma, even here, just as in the term religion is used differently. But when scholars are talking about it, they take a specific meaning and they talk about it. There are 2 very small things which I wanted to respond to in terms to Alok Tandonji. One was that, in terms of the background, since Radhakrishnan is referring to people like Samuel Alexander, Whitehead, Aquinas, and Bergson, his idealism that he's talking about is very much, according to him, not very different from the idealism which is being given by the others. The other thing which I wanted to call attention to, Alokji, where he mentioned in the end that why are the sadhus going to the Ambani wedding? I think you must remember your own Marx very well, because Marx had very clearly said that actually capital is the new God. So when he's writing about capitalism, he's saying capital is the new God. Now you don't have the old gods at all. The trouble, his criticism of religion is actually not a criticism primarily of God and godliness and images of God and institutions. It is about a certain attitude towards certain things of absolute subservience and following. And he is saying that very clearly in his, when he's talking about capitalism, that capital is the new God. So if capital is the new God, no wonder that all sorts of people, including whom we call the fakirs and the sadhus, will go to where the capital exists. And so that's where I was wondering we would look at. And I feel a little sad when I criticize Radhakrishnan, because I think he's an honest man who's seeing hope in some kind of an internality and compassion. And his combination of Buddhism and Vedanta is also not only unique to him. There are many other scholars apart from him who try to read, especially Nagarjun's Mool Madhyamik Karika and subsequently the Vigraha Vyavartini, as actually very Vedantic. So it would not be entirely correct to say that he mistook Buddhism, because there are many other scholars, and especially I also found it very difficult to see that when you are looking at Nagarjun, the great logician who gives you this brilliant Mool Madhyamik Karika and postulates Nisvabhavata, when you read his Vigraha Vyavartini and subsequent work, he turns out to be an idealist. So you cannot just summarily dismiss the view of Radhakrishnan as wrong about Buddhism, where he draws Buddhism close to Vedanta. But I'm really grateful to everybody for giving me this opportunity. And thank you, Shipra. And again, I must thank Professor Balram Singh and Prashant for bringing us all together.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, sir. And we have already ahead of time. So we have to close now because our discussion will go and go and go around. So thank you, Meera ma'am. Thank you, all of you. Thank you, Arpi sir. And we will meet. Thank you, ma'am. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Alok sir. And with this, we want to convey the message that we should accomplish the mission of what Balram sir has now suggested, and tell all of us that we should we are seeking for some Indian philosopher, great Indian philosophers, and we will definitely do what we have planned. So please be with us for the wonderful talk, for the another session on 16th August. So till then, bye. Namaskar.